divine or divine seal of approval. We are branches, he is divine. So as I say, we've already gone through another in a long line of conveniently misinterpreted facts. And this one is the widely taught error that Yeshua came to do away with the law. And this is based as usual on several unsubstantiated, mangled translations. The first, as we know, is based on the difference between the oral law and the written Torah. Oral is the law, written is teaching, instruction. So we're not under the law, we're under instruction, we're under teaching, because we don't follow the oral law, which is taught by the Pharisees. So the oral is the teachings or rules of the Pharisees, explained by Yeshua, who says, these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far away from me. And that describes far too many people that involve themselves in religious meetings. And their worship of me is useless because they teach man-made rules as if they were doctrine. And that's true both through the church and through the synagogues. They spend all the time teaching man-made rules. And they teach them as if they were doctrine. And what it says is that because of that, their worship of me is useless. Strong words again. In the Talmud, which is the oral teachings, halacha, which is the written and the oral code of Jewish law, which is 613 rules and regulations, plus 7 rabbinic rules and regulations. And in the Shulchan Aruch, or the Mishnah Torah, and the Minhag are the customs. They also hold that all descendants of Noach, including Gentiles, are all subject to the 7 Noachide laws, the covenant that Yahweh made with Noach after the flood. And they say that everybody is subject to these, that there is to be no murder, no theft, no sexual immorality, including homosexual, no cutting of live flesh from animals, no idol worship or prayer to idols or foreign gods, no blasphemy, and the establishment of an honest and fair system of justice. And one of the things you'll find that's been carried on right the way down through Judaism is an honest and fair system of justice. It's one of the top things that they look to. And the Western system of law is what's come from that. So what did he really mean? I mean, really mean, when he stated in Matthew 5:17, just after he'd outlined the behaviour necessary to be blessed, the Beatitudes. Just after that, which is where people tend to cut off and not read the rest of it, he stated, do not think that I've come to abolish Torah, all the prophets. I have come not to abolish, but to complete. Now this passage is the foundation of those who teach and say that he came to get rid of the law, or to bring it to an end, and nullifying the whole of the Old Testament and placing us under grace. What they completely fail to understand out of denial and ignorance of the real translation of the words abolish and complete from the Hebrew is that the word that they translated abolish, la'achor, does not actually mean abolish or remove. It actually means misinterpret. So he's saying, I didn't come to misinterpret Torah. And lachayem, the word that they translate complete, does not mean to put an end to. It actually means to explain or correctly interpret. Torah by practicing and teaching by that practice. In other words, Yeshua was saying, don't think I've come to wrongly interpret the Torah or the prophets. What I've actually come to do is to explain and interpret, and in fact, not a single stroke or a yud, which is the smallest possible emphasis or punctuation mark, will be removed from Torah. Doesn't that make a lot more sense?
Yeah.
He came to explain Torah. He came to fulfill Torah. He didn't come to misinterpret it like the Pharisees did. He came to interpret it. When you get the correct meaning on those two words, it changes that whole sentence. It's a game changer.
So for example, it says, the Lord says, the goal to which Torah points is Yeshua. It is not the end. He is not the end of it. It's the goal to which Torah points is Yeshua.
Yes.
And David Stern put that really clear.
When we're redeemed, we haven't picked up an insurance policy. It's a beginning, it's a start, it's a first step. Then we have to actually start learning what we need to do and start living it. So you're redeemed, will be. But it's a beginning, not an end. So if you take la'achor and la'chayem, which are the actual original words, and you realise that the interpretation of them is not to abolish, it's about not misinterpreting, but about interpreting. And then suddenly that whole passage makes sense. So as I say, the places a completely different emphasis on his words. It is an absolute game changer. It's one of the passages that they use to justify replacement theology. And it's one of the things they use to justify we're living under grace. Now let's get to grace. We've done this before, but I'll just do a brief explanation of it again. Again, the word's not grace, it's chesed. And as chesed, as we've discussed before, as Luther taught it, who's supposed to be the guy that started the whole Reformation with this living under grace, not under the law, it's based on the erroneous interpretation of the word. Luther's teaching on grace has resulted in a twisting of Yeshua's teaching on the same subject. And Luther used it as a formula to sin, drink, women, etc. To quote him, this is quoting him, when he was asked about sin, the question was put to him, I accept that we're all sinners, but shouldn't we try not to sin? Sounds a reasonable question to me. And his answer was, be a sinner boldly, and rejoice in Christ even more boldly, for he is victorious over sin, death, and the world. As long as we're here in the world, we have to sin. This life is not a dwelling place of righteousness. But as Peter says, we look for a new heaven and a new earth in which righteousness dwells.
Wow.
It is enough that by the riches of God's glory, we have come to know the Lamb that take away the sins of the world. No sin will separate us from the Lamb. That's an open invitation to do whatever you like. Isn't that pretty much what people are doing today? They're under grace.
We had a rabbi come to a particular church, and they quoted some of the things.
Oh, this is the tip of the iceberg.
But they just quote the Bible instead of Luther.
It says, so he said to them, no sin will separate us from the Lamb, even though we commit fornication and murder 1,000 times a day. This was his answer. This is the father of grace, the father of the Reformation. Do not think that the purchase price that was paid for the redemption of your sins is too small. Pray boldly. You are too mighty a sinner. So just like Henry VIII, he completely lost the plot and interpreted things the way that suited him. He had an agenda for doing this. It enabled him to justify the transition from an officially celibate Catholic priest to a non-celibate drunken womanizer. The whole reason he wanted that particular passage interpreted that way is because he wanted to marry the nun he'd lived with for however many years. And he wanted to carry on drinking every night, which he couldn't have done as a Catholic priest to that extent. So it gave him an excuse, just like Henry VIII decided to change things to enable him to do what he actually wanted to do. Made it up as he went along. But even worse, he had all around him a collection of former monks, priests and nuns, and he encouraged them to do the same. They all started openly living with each other and meeting him at the pub at night. And I've told you the story before of why meeting time is 10:30 in the morning. Because it started out at 8 or 8:30 and he got drunk the night before and couldn't make it, so he made it 9. And he couldn't make that, and he tried 9:30, he couldn't make that, and eventually he finished up at 10:30 so that he could get rid of the hangover from the night before. And ever since then, the church has met at 10:30 and sung a lot of the drinking songs that they used to sing, but put Christian words to. And in answer to the next question that was put to him, the person said, I am a believer in grace, but what should I do when I'm feeling guilty? His answer was, when the devil harasses you, seek the company of men and drink even more, or joke and talk nonsense, or do some other merry thing. Sometimes we must drink more, sport, recreate ourselves, and even sin a little, just to spite the devil, so that we leave him with no place for troubling our consciences with trifles. We are conquered if we try to leave him no place for troubling our consciences. We are conquered if we try to conscientiously not to sin at all. So when the devil says to you, do not drink, answer him, I will drink and right freely, just because you told me not to. And of course he carried out his convenient theories to the full as a womanizing drunkard. Even Shaul, who's totally misinterpreted and misused to justify men's doctrines, proved his full commitment to Torah in Acts 21 by countering the accusations that he no longer observed or taught Torah. So he entered into the Nazarite vow and cut his hair and did everything else and took some other people with him and went to the temple and went through the whole process. Does this sound like Paul, who was totally against things and he done away with the law? And the thing that they were accusing of wasn't true, and it's the thing they're still accusing him of, and they misinterpret most of what he said. So this is Luther's take on everything. So it's no wonder that things are happening the way they are, because they've been told that that's the right thing to do. The Reformation brought all of this in. Chesed, or grace, is a concept that's impossible to translate as most Hebrew words are. It's impossible to translate into a single English word. It's a concept. Which is why Coverdale did one of the first English translations. He had to make a word up to translate it. And the word he made up to translate from chesed was loving kindness. He had to invent a word because he just couldn't interpret it. So this is where loving kindness came from. It wasn't even a word, he made it up. But he was trying to get the concept across, which at least is better than translating it into a single word that doesn't make sense. So it was never translated as grace, it was translated as loving kindness, which probably sums it up a lot better. But chesed is actually a covenant word. Chesed is an unconditional commitment or spontaneous, unexpected, undeserved mercy, love, kindness, redemption and forgiveness, and is the required attitude by both parties to any covenant. And the covenant is always based on trust, love and loyalty. And of course, it's based purely on a decision, not feelings. You don't enter into a covenant based on feelings, you enter into a covenant based on a decision. I've explained covenants before. They are binding, free will, mutual agreements based on trust in advance. Trust that promises to keep my part of the covenant, whether or not you keep yours. So even if you don't keep your part of the covenant, I'm still required to keep mine. And the reasoning behind that is if I do that, eventually you'll come back and start to do yours again. It'll build trust. As opposed to contracts that are all based on mistrust. A covenant, a contract is based on mistrust. That's why you have to have a contract. Because if it's like you don't do this or you don't do that, then I'm going to hang you. There are penalties. And the problem with contracts is that they fall apart as soon as one side lets down the other. And that leads to bitterness, leads to unforgiveness, and draconian punitive clauses. And they're put there to force compliance and punish non-compliance with bitterness and revenge, as in today's divorce laws. And unfortunately, with today's divorce laws, it's the kids that get stuck in the middle. They're used as a weapon either way. Which is why he always said that marriage was to be a covenant, not a contract. A contract is a civil thing. So marriage, the Torah's definition of marriage and redemption are the best examples of covenant. In Yochanan 17, 3 foundational principles are outlined by Yeshua, with a promise that includes further teaching on them by the Ruach HaKodesh, who's the Spirit of truth, who will lead us into all truth. 1, about sin. Yeshua said people don't put their trust in Yahweh. And 2, about righteousness. He is with the Father and we are redeemed. And 3, about judgment. The ruler of this world has been judged already. People are expecting this great big trial in the end days. He's already been judged. He's already been found guilty. All they're waiting to do is carry out the sentence. He's already beaten. He just won't lie down and accept it. And he wants to take as many with him as possible.
Do you think the United Nations would throw us in the bin?
Oh, you mean the disunited nations?
Hamas.
Yes. So sola fide, or grace through faith, which is the principle that he outlined, or to yet again translate correctly, trust alone, was Luther's main treatise, has to be interpreted and understood in its true context of chesed, a covenant agreement to and entered into by us at the time of our absolutely unmerited redemption. Did we deserve it? No. As I've said many times, never, never, never ask for what you deserve, or you'll be in big trouble. It works both ways. If I got what I deserved, I wouldn't be stood here. I'd be a pile of ashes. I'm very fortunate that I haven't got what I deserved. But it's because it was chesed, it was a covenant agreement. And what it did was outline the benefits that were freely given to us to enable us to fulfill the responsibilities required of us as outlined in Torah. Does that make sense? It was given to us to enable us to do what we needed to do what we wanted to do. Without that, we couldn't have done it. We can't do any of these things unless he makes it possible for us and leads and guides us. It's impossible. I'm going to change, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. Oh yeah? That's what everybody says every New Year's Eve. You can't. I couldn't get myself redeemed. I couldn't do anything else. Just relax and admit it to him. And say, I've got this problem. There's nothing I can do about it. I'm just going to ask you to come alongside me and help me deal with it. It takes all the pressure off. As long as the commitment's there, that when he starts doing it, you do what he says and do it his way. I've explained the difference again between shame and conviction. Condemnation. There is no condemnation to believers. We are not to accept it. We're not to get involved in it. There is no condemnation. There is no shame. That comes directly from the pit. It comes from the enemy. And what it's designed to do is to destroy us. If we start coming under shame, it destroys who we are. Conviction, on the other hand, tells us we've done something wrong, but it provides a way of escape. Condemnation and shame just tells you everything you've done wrong. And a lot of it's not true, but it just makes you feel lousy. Conviction points to a problem that you have and then says, right, now I'm going to come alongside you if you want me to, and let's work through this and let's deal with it. If you haven't got that conviction of a way to deal with it, ignore him. He's a liar. He doesn't know how to tell the truth. He only knows how to tell lies. So, ignore him. If you're under conviction, that's totally different. And the way you know you're under conviction is because he tells you this is the way to deal with it. And he provides a way of escape. That happened with redemption, and it will happen with every other part of your life. We put ourselves under so much pressure to be holy and to be good. I can't possibly come to a meeting unless I'm good. And if I'm not good, I can't come to a meeting. That was Adam and Eve's problem. They ate the apple and suddenly they weren't going to meet. They weren't going to have the garden meeting at night. Can't face it. We're going to hide ourselves. We hide behind a tree. And that's what people do. They hide behind trees and they think, we can't go and meet with all these holy people because I've done something wrong. We need to do the opposite. When we do something like that, we need to repent and come into his presence. He already knows what we've done wrong. He's just waiting for us to admit it and come alongside him and saying, this is the way we're going to fix it.
It's very hard to confess your sins one to another.
Yes, it is. You have to trust people an awful lot to do that. But your first port of call is always him. And if he wants you to share it with somebody, he'll show you. He'll tell
And
you.
then they can open up and, you know.
And the only reason you do it is so that they will come alongside you and help you.
Yes.
They will become the instrument that he's using to help you get through it. Sometimes we have to be mutually accountable, responsible to each other for something. Because sometimes I just don't trust myself. I say, I want to do this, I'd like to do this, but I really need to share it with somebody else and they'll encourage me to do it and they'll hold me to account if I don't.
So
Not in a condemning way,
no.
but in a positive way.
So we can't have arguments and snap at one another, but if we know somebody has a problem, we can't just leave and get to pray.
Yeah.
And then he
But
gets
what
the
problem
honor.
have they got that we haven't had?
Yes. Yeah.
It might come out in a different way, but it all comes from the same root. If we realise we're in a covenant relationship with them and we treat them with chesed, then we can come alongside and there's no condemnation, there's no shame. We're in no position to judge anybody. Hands up who's in a position to judge anybody. Good. We'll leave that to the only person that's actually qualified. So chesed also outlines the benefits that are freely given to us to enable us to fulfill our responsibilities to Yahweh that are required of us as outlined in Torah, in chesed. And of course, Yaakov hits the real mark. I mean, Yaakov always hits the real mark. But in 2:17, Yaakov 2:17, trust, mistranslated as faith, but trust by itself, unaccompanied by actions, is dead. That really turns the whole thing on its head. That trust without actions is dead. It's sterile. It's barren. Unless we put it into action, it's just words. And we're just going to all sound like politicians. How many people trust politicians? Why don't you trust them? Because they say one thing and they do another. And of course it's not just them. Some of them aren't like that, but it's a generalisation. So trust by itself, unaccompanied by actions, is dead. Actions without trust is also the same, it's dead. One or the other on their own doesn't cut it. But you put the two together and you really can start motoring. But because people have been indoctrinated, and I do mean indoctrinated, and taught wrongly, the prevalent attitude is the same as Luther's teaching, that anything and everything goes. We're not under the law anymore. Don't tell me I can't do it. We're under grace. I can do whatever I like. Which is exactly what he taught. It's not what Yeshua taught.
They've got it in the schools and the universities. If you want to do something, if you don't allow yourself freedom, you'll damage yourself psychologically.
Oh yeah, we can't have that, can we?
No.
I mean, what's that going to happen when we find ourselves? We might not like what we find. If it feels good, do it. If you can't be with the one you love the one you're with. This is where all these sayings came from.
Yeah.
It's that same attitude.
Yeah.
It's okay. Make it up as you go along. Truth's relative. Just don't tell the relatives. And the prescribing consequences is just so last millennium and super unfair because we aren't under the law anymore. Hello? So apparently the 10 words or the 10 commandments have been cancelled. For all modern believers. Funny, I haven't had that memo from head office yet. And I'm sure nobody else has. Oh, and of course, this also means that you're teaching your children that they can do whatever they like. They can steal money, they can crash your car, they can party through the night, they can drop out of school, they can tell their friends that you're actually dead or just a figment of their imagination, right? Why? Because they're under grace. Right? No. 1,000 times no. By rejecting all of Torah, they are rejecting the God of Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, the God of Israel, a description that he gave himself. It's not what I'm calling him, it's what he called himself. If you don't like it, take it up with him. But he sounds so Jewish. That was his decision, not mine. He's identifying himself because there's many gods out there. There's thousands of gods out there. And they say, oh, but we're all the same. We're all under the same God. No, we're not. I don't bow down to the moon god, Allah. But by doing that and rejecting the God of Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, the God of Israel, the description that he gave to himself, and by doing that, they put themselves under a curse. He says that when you reject his word and you reject him, you put yourself under a curse. And they're going to be popular when you tell them. But it has to be done in a gentle, loving way, not a harsh, judgmental way. It's all in the delivery. We've all been there. So they put themselves under a curse by doing that, and they make their rebellious, self-interpreted, man-made religious worship futile and useless. His words. By following man-made rules and following their things, and by rejecting his Torah, they are making their worship futile and useless. They say the right things with their lips, but their hearts are far away from him. They might bring their hearts to the meeting on a Sunday, but it's their lips that do all the moving, and the heart just goes back to where it was before again. I'm not saying everybody, but I'm saying in general it's a problem, because if you haven't got a relationship with him, then your heart's not engaged with him. Your heart has to be engaged with him on a 7-day, weekly basis. And that's what makes you a part of the body. Not what building you go to, or what name's above it, or what you call yourself, or what you don't call yourself. It's all about your relationship with him and the commitment you've made to him in a covenant relationship. And it transcends buildings. If the Tanakh, or the Old Testament, is so outdated, how come Yeshua and his Talmud quoted it? I've got an answer. They had nothing else. They didn't have a New Testament. How could they quote it? How could it be what they were under grace? They weren't under grace because they didn't have one. All they had was Torah. And yet they seemed to manage somehow. Yeshua seemed to manage to teach people just from Torah. Isn't that amazing? And when I say Torah, I'm not just talking about the first 5 books, I'm talking about all of his word. All of his word is Torah. All of it's a teaching. All of it's instruction. When I hear from him, it's living Torah. And how come the Talmud continued to quote it before and continued to quote it after his execution by the Romans? If it was finished with, why were they going and teaching people with it, quoting them things to them? What they were basically saying to people when they went out and about is, look, the prophecies have been fulfilled. They were saying exactly what he said, that he's come, he's done what he said he would do, and he's fulfilled Torah. He's explained Torah to us. He's told us how to do it. He's shown us how to do it. On the contrary, it is purely and solely out of my relationship of love and trust and respect for all of Torah and my loved ones that my behaviour is restored. And teaching others to do the same. That's what he's saying. It's not just whether I believe it and I do it, but also those who teach it. And this is a very important part that we miss sometimes when he says these things and says that if you do these things and teach others to do it, you've got a problem. And you put them under a problem. It's, when he gave that illustration about tying something around your neck and throwing yourself into the water if you upset and teach the little ones the wrong thing, this is what he's talking about. If we don't teach them the truth, then we become a stumbling block to them because we're teaching them lies. And I've said many, many times in the West, we teach them all this garbage about Father Christmas and the Easter Bunny and all these things, and they get to a certain age and they find out we've been lying to them. Yeah, and yet, what do they learn from that?
Tell it to their children.
They told me about the tooth fairy. They told me about the bunny. They told me about Father Christmas. And it's all not true. So this probably isn't true either.
Yeah.
Peter Pan.
We're teaching them that parents lie. I would never intentionally do anything to disrespect, damage, or hurt Torah or my family. I don't need a set of rules to tell me not to. It's out of my relationship with them. I would never do anything to hurt them.
Yes.
They're my neighbour when I'm at home. Other people are my neighbour when I'm not at home. My job is to love them and to want the best for them and to do the best for them. That's why that's the foundation for everything else. Because if you follow that through, everything else comes into place. Yes, there's been times when I felt like murdering my children. Because I love them, they get a jail out of free card. Of course we feel like doing things at certain times. So I said, don't go by your feelings. Never go by your feelings. We would never want to do any of those things to hurt any of our loved ones. We want the best for them. It may not seem it that way at times, because we say things that they don't want to hear, like no. They don't hear as much as they should, and they also don't learn that there are consequences to actions. It shapes the way Torah should be obeyed. Abba is my ultimate ahava, my ultimate loved one. Ahava, or love, shapes the way Torah should be obeyed. What they fail to understand is that love has two sides to it. It has consequences if you fail to do what it says. And it teaches you the way you should go. And some people call it tough love, they call it all sorts of different things. It's just scriptural principles.
You don't want their blood on your hands.
True. Does Yahweh let me get away with anything? Absolutely not. Would you let your kids get away with anything? No, because you know it's not good for them. Not because you hate them, we don't like them. You do it because you know it's in their own best interest to teach them discipline and to give them boundaries. As I've said many, many times before, unless children experience boundaries, they feel rejected. They feel unloved. How do I know? Because I've talked to enough adult people that have said, if only my father had given me more rules and more boundaries. And out of that, they felt insecure. Children need boundaries to feel secure. They don't need to be unrealistic boundaries, but they do need to be boundaries. Yahweh sets boundaries all the way through this. And because of that, I can feel secure. It doesn't tell me I can't do everything. All it tells me is that I shouldn't do the things that will hurt me and the things that will hurt other people. But it gives me a wide range of things I can do quite happily. But the problem is we always focus on the things we're not supposed to do, the things we shouldn't do, instead of focusing on the huge amount of things that we can do, we're free to do.
You know, Jeffrey, hardly any people know the benefits of the Lord.
Mm.
And Paul, I was just thinking when you were saying, the benefits, what was that? He said, not everything is beneficial.
No.
It seems good.
Yeah. Because we live in New Zealand, we live in a place that's governed by rules and laws and regulations. Do we like them all? No. Does it keep us safer than if we went to some country that didn't have any of that? No. We accept some of these things, even though they're not always the things that we would like. But we accept the fact that it governs our society and makes it a friendlier, more gentle society than going to some place where it's the rule of the gun.
Somalia.
There was a little child at the shopping centre 2 weeks ago. He was screaming his head off, and you know, if they get in a tantrum, it's damaging to the lining brain and everything. But the parents had people watching them, and they were frightened too. I said to them, give him a drink of water, puts a cold face cloth or a hanky on his face, hold him, and if he's cheeky too, give him a little tap. But they're scared. You said
Not
they
allowed.
can't do that.
No.
So they stood and, but he heard me talking, and he thought this is different.
Yes.
You know, and he stopped his nonsense.
Because they're operating under contracts. It's all the law and the contracts that the law produces. And under the contracts, this is it. If they were under covenant, it was based on relationship, then they would deal with things differently.
Same with us and the farmers yesterday. There was this woman in there with a young child and he was touching things he wasn't supposed to, of course. And she was telling him not to, and she was getting angry, and he's getting, you know, like, I'm not going to do what you say type attitude. Anyway, I walked past and I said, so-and-so, because she'd used his name, I said, you do what your mother tells you.
Good for you.
One of my
And
favourite
he's
jokes.
looking around like this.
One of my favourite jokes is about this young child who got on one of these machines that you see outside stores, and you put money in it, so it goes backwards and forwards, or up and down, all the different things it does. And anyway, he badgered her, and she eventually gave him enough money to have 3 rides, and it still wasn't enough. He wanted more, and literally had a tantrum in the thing, would not get out of the thing, even though there was a queue of other kids waiting to get in. And she just didn't know what to do. The staff came, the manager came, and they didn't know what to do. And so he put in a call to the store psychiatrist. So obviously this is an American thing. Anyway, the store psychiatrist came over, and he just looked at him, and he went over and he just whispered in his ear. And immediately the boy jumped out, stood with his hands to attention. He said, what pearls of wisdom did you give him? He said, I told him if he didn't get out of the car, I'd belt his ear. So on the contrary, it's purely and solely out of my relationship of love and trust and respect for all of Torah and my loved ones that my behaviour is restored, redeemed and reformed. Ahava, or love, shapes the way Torah should be obeyed. It is the explanation of Torah. Again, his words. That it says, love is the explanation of Torah. Which I love that translation. And without it, we are and we have nothing. Remember the part where it says, I can do all things, I can know all things, but if I don't have love, I am nothing. And this is somebody talking that knew all of the law, he knew all of the regulations, he knew all of Torah, he could recite it down to the last dot, but said, if I don't have love, I have nothing. Why? Because 2 commandments sum it all up and define Torah. Love. Love Yahweh and love your neighbours or one another, causing Arava, or love, to be made complete in us. Again, his word, that Ahava, or love, is made complete in us. That's what he wants. He wants love to be made complete in us. That's why it has to be unconditional. If it's not unconditional, it won't work. Forgiveness has to be unconditional. We'll never do it. Oh, but they don't deserve it. Oh, they're terrible people. Oh, they did this. You don't know what they did to me. I don't need to know. Forgiveness has to be unconditional, with no strings attached, because the person that's set free when we forgive is us. If you don't forgive them, they still have a hold on you. Doesn't that change the way you view it? They still control your life.
And if they're nasty, I found people nasty to me, if they hadn't been nasty like that, if I don't forgive them, I'm not going to bloat that now I hand them over to God. But God wanted a reason to chastise them because they were doing it to lots of people. And so, it comes back to me every now and then.
As long as you're doing the job, he'll leave you to it.
Yeah.
But it won't destroy them, it will destroy you. But if you hand it over to him and say, I forgive them, and leave them in his hands, he'll deal with it.
Please,
Far more effective
please
than we can.
forgive them. If I meet them on the street, how do I show love to that person? We'll run away, but maybe not.
Your feelings sometimes take a while to catch up, but it's the physical act of saying, I forgive them
Yes.
unconditionally.
Choose.
And choosing to love someone unconditionally, because unless it's unconditional with no strings, it's not love. And again, I've done it before and I'll do it some other time. There are so many different variations of that word love that were mangled by the Greeks because they had 6 or 7 different definitions. It's got nothing to do with ahava. Ahava is a concept. We need to study ahava. You need to study the Hebrew definition of love for it to be made complete in us. So shalom, Torah ahava, or Torah lover. Shalom.
Thank you very much.